My guests today are Joan Shirley with the Resource Center for Victims of Violent Death. Danielle Albright is an assistant professor in the Department of Emergency Medicine at UNM Hospital. And Mary Ellen Garcia is with the Crime Victims Reparation Commission. Thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you.
Danielle, I want to start with you. Over the past 2 decades in this country, more domestic violence related deaths were due to guns than all other weapons combined. Last year, you guys looked at every death in New Mexico that happened in 2012 that was related to domestic violence, just the ones that were closed cases. That was 19 people. Of the 19 people that you looked at, how many of them were killed by guns?
16 of the 19 people in the 2012 case set were killed by gunshot wounds.
Now, was that an unusual year, or is that what it generally looks like over time? Because you've been involved in this project for a while.
Right. Homicide, being a rare event, will fluctuate from year to year, the circumstances of those deaths. And so we do see some variation from year to year. On average, when we pull together all of the domestic violence homicides that we've looked at over the past 5 or so years, it's around 50%. Firearms are the #1 cause of death in our cases, but it's about at an average of 50%.
Mary Ellen, you know, this number it seems like it's a lot of people, 19, who've died, but it could also seem small, you know, that's only 19 people. Who is not included in that number? It's not every death.
Correct. So we're only able to review cases that have already gone through the judicial process. So there's on average about 5 or 6 cases each year that we're not able to review because it's still going through the court system. So we're still looking at another 5 or 6 cases, in addition to any other homicide related cases that were not determined to be intimate partner violence related. So the offender might not have been located, or there's still causes or determinations that haven't been made. So those are cases that we're not able to review because we're not able to identify them.
So there's some number of additional cases where you're just not totally sure yet whether they are domestic violence related, but you kind of think they might be.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Joan, in 2011, more than half of the women murdered with guns in this country were killed by their partners or family members. In your work on this team and with the victims and families that you work with in your group, what have you learned about the connection between domestic violence and guns here in New Mexico?
Well, I think the availability of guns in homes is very high in New Mexico. And oftentimes people, as they go through the process of domestic violence, they downplay every time it escalates. And so oftentimes they're in and out of parents' homes, they're in and out leaving their children, and so they start breaking those bridges that connect them to their families. And so oftentimes they're not in connection with their families at the time that this happens, or the family's very aware of the abuse. They're tired of it. They want things to change, and she keeps going back and they don't understand. And so by the time this comes about, it's like sometimes they're surprised. Sometimes they're like, I just knew it was going to happen. I just knew it was going to happen. I just don't really think it would happen. We can't live like that. But I think it's mostly that people just are tired. They're tired of the situation, and so they play down, unfortunately, a lot of the violence.
Now, you mentioned women, but Danielle, we're not just talking about women here.
No, not at all. I mean, we review cases, of course, where any person dies during an incident of domestic violence due to homicide. And so that will include male victims of intimate partner violence. We typically see 1 to 2 of those per year. It also includes cases where the perpetrator of the intimate partner violence is killed.
Like a murder-suicide.
Like a murder-suicide, or a self-defense, or a police intervention as well. So we review all of those cases.
And bystanders are often killed in these.
Absolutely.
Who are those bystanders in the report here?
Bystanders, so of those 19 deaths reported from 2012, 3 of those deaths were homicide of a bystander to the intimate partner violence.
So they weren't even really involved in the.
One was a new partner to a victim of intimate partner violence. They were both then murdered by a previous partner. We also see other family members. So 2 cases involved other family members who were there as well.
And people trying to intervene,
Right.
trying to get in the middle of the situation and end up being the
Shot.
victim.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yes.
Yes.
Mary Ellen, in this most recent report, you made about 20 recommendations, and you were the chair this year. You made about 20 recommendations for how to prevent this. And this is why this group was put together by the state to figure out how to reduce these numbers, right? One of those recommendations had to do with guns. What did this team say the legislature should do?
Well, consistently over the past several years in reviewing these cases, as I've been participating on the team, is to mirror the language, the federal language with prohibited persons for individuals accessing firearms. So having the state legislature mirror that federal language to for the prohibited persons regarding gun access to guns.
So what we're talking about here is someone who is a felon or has a restraining order, or we know that domestic violence is happening. Is that what a prohibited person is?
Correct. So it's under 18 USC 922G.
I'll go look that right
You'll
up.
go look that right up, right? The federal language basically states that it outlines who is a prohibited person. And so what that does is it makes individuals who have orders of protection issued against them, if they're a felon, or if they've been convicted of any sort of household member, so a domestic violence, intimate partner violence related crime, even on the misdemeanor level, it makes them a prohibited person. So their ability to purchase a firearm has been taken away.
Well, why do we need to mirror a federal law if we already have the federal law, Danielle?
One of the reasons why the team thinks it's important to mirror that law is because it would provide local jurisdiction and the ability to generate local and state resources because they encounter issues with actually engaging in the divestment of firearms for people who are prohibited, going out and getting them physically. Who does that? Where do we put them? Like, what resources go into that? And by having the mirror legislation, as other states have done, may help us be able to generate those resources in our own state.
Joan, you know, some of the people, you work with families of people who have been killed.
Correct. The
but
living
also,
victims.
But also some people who survived,
Yes.
who made it,
yes,
right?
they were lucky to have survived an attempted murder.
Do you hear from them something that they wish would be done about guns, or is that not their big concern?
No, I hear it all the time. I mean, it isn't always a handgun in a murder. It might be a very powerful rifle. It could be a shotgun. It can be lots of different kinds of guns involved in it. And so, yes, people often say, well, you know, he was arrested for this, and yet they didn't take his gun away. And they keep her in danger by having that gun in the home. And so I find that to be the case, is that they want them taken away. They want them gone. And we just don't have those capabilities at this point. By mirroring the federal law, we would then be forced into a situation where we could find depositories and places to put those guns.
Now, you see this anecdotally, you hear this from victims, but statistics show that when a gun is present in a domestic violence situation, it increases the risk of homicide for women by 500%. When you look over the reports of these things, you know, is that apparent to you? Is that something that you can see in the reports of what happened in these incidents?
I think the incidents that we review are so incredibly complicated. We're dealing with people who have suffered an immense tragedy. We have living victims who are working through that, and they're complicated cases that we have to look at each of them on an individual basis, because each is unique and each had their own set of circumstances that brought them to that point. And I think as a team, what we've done really well is try to identify where we're successful in prevention of homicides, where we have the resources available, and identify some of the resources and systems that need improvement. Where are those weaknesses? Such as one of the recommendations that we've made and what we've done as a state is dedicate funding towards high lethality assessment teams, not only through federal funding, but also through state funding and state initiatives, where we have several programs around the state. Valencia Shelter Services and Los Lunas Police Department is one of those very such programs where they're partnering with local law enforcement to do high lethality assessments on intimate partner cases, which include looking at access to weapons and access to those.
Now, over the years, you've made a number of recommendations, I'm sure. Which of those, Danielle, have been adopted and been successful so far in addition to that one?
It's hard to pin. We have had several recommendations actually that have led to either changes in the way an agency or a set of agencies deals with some particular aspect of the case. We have a lot of success at asking people across law enforcement, courts, and in victim services and other types of services to improve training components to help people really understand this complexity, which I feel like, one of the things we see over and over at every system that we encounter is kind of this initial minimalization of the seriousness of what's happening to people when they experience violence. And so
They don't think it's a big enough deal.
That first incident is not necessarily taken seriously either by the people involved or by the systems they encounter as a result of that incident that comes to the attention
But
of
you
law
know it's a
enforcement.
harbinger.
And so we see this accumulation over time for some people. Again, we're looking at the worst case scenario. We are looking at cases that resulted in death. And so it is that drive to make people understand that domestic violence is a patterned activity and it's complex and has many components. Access to weapons definitely is one of those risk factors, but there's a whole series of things that people often minimize and don't understand that there's a risk. And why would I not have a firearm in my home, for example? Because it's not going to be used against me, but there are all these other warning signs I think that people minimize over time.
Now, you told us that in New Mexico, guns are the #1 cause of death in domestic violence situations. And you've made recommendations over the year that rules and practices around guns be changed. Have any of those been adopted?
The only consistent recommendation we've made is about the mirror legislation. It's been made multiple times since the federal law was adopted. That has been a concern to the team. I can't think offhand of any others that have that the team has put forward. One of the reasons being, of course, we are concerned with making recommendations that have both feasibility and the potential to prevent future injury and death. So we focus on those that are possible.
Yes.
So this is possible, but the legislature hasn't done it.
Not at this time.
Ladies, thank you so much for being with us today.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. Thank you.